Of all the time that I've spent making this channel since 2010, I believe is when we started this. 7 years now we've been going strong. And while we've taken many different hiatuses and there have been different versions of this show that exist out there on the channel, there's one game in particular that I have always wanted to review. And for some reason, I never got to it. I don't see very many people talk about this game. In fact, I don't even know if anybody really knows or remembers that this game exists. But I do. In fact, it was one of my favorites. That game, of course, is Pac-Man 2 for the Sega Genesis. Genesis! How do you make a sequel to Pac-Man? It's a game about a little guy who eats dots. I don't quite get it, but they did. It's right here. They made it. Fucking look at it. Look, we gotta look at Pac-Man as a character. Not that bullshit. I don't know what that is. That's weird looking. Like, who the fuck is that guy? I don't give a shit. Believe it or not, we gotta take a trip back to the 80s, because that's when Pac-Man had a cartoon. Yeah, there was just sort of this, like, weird animated series of Pac-Man that just kind of existed for some reason. I also really like how Pac-Man just has this, like, really gruff, like, low-sounding voice for some reason. Like, not what you'd expect at all with a character of this design, you know? Like, it was, like, the same thing that they did with the Mario Brothers cartoon. It's just really deep and rough, and it's just like, this is what Pac-Man sounds like in the cartoon.
Well, I hope this isn't gonna be another one of those picnics.
Because, you know, you take a character that looks like this, you say, well, if we stick a few arms on him, maybe give him some legs, you know, suddenly, boom, we got a character. We got Pac-Man. It's Pac-Man. This is the Pac. This is the man. Boom, Pac-Man. So this kind of paved the way for how Pac-Man in all of his incarnations outside of the video games would kind of look like. There were even a few games that took this art style to heart and actually made their sprites look that way. Technically speaking, this is canon. This is the official licensed Namco sequel to Pac-Man, the arcade game where you eat dots. There's not really much of a story to go here, but they did it. Somehow they did it, and oh my god, and I loved it. It was my favorite. It was my favorite game. I talk about Boogerman a lot. I liked Boogerman. I mean, Boogerman was just because it made me chuckle as a child. I even did a review on it at one point, but boy howdy, I can't believe I never fucking talked about Pac-Man 2. So here we go. Let's take this shit and pop this shit in it, and we're gonna have ourselves a grand old time. Pac-Man 2. So if you're wondering why it was I brought up Pac-Man the animated series, it's actually kind of simple. This game is a point-and-click adventure game, and therefore, by all accounts, it's an interactive cartoon. It even says so on the box. Which is funny, by the way, there are two versions of this cover art. Specifically, it seems with the Super Nintendo version versus the Genesis one. Here, Pac-Man is sort of in a leisurely adventure scene. You know, he's about to take a daring leap into the abyss and hang glide away. Meanwhile, on this one, Pac-Man is about to lose his fucking shit because he forgot he doesn't know how to hang glide. Growing up, I didn't even know the alternate cover existed, as I ever only owned the Sega version, but I really can't imagine a decent reason why this discrepancy of box art even exists. Maybe it was because Sega was like, this has to be all about blast processing, so they commissioned the artist to make something extreme for the Sega one, even if it was just extreme terror. So the basic gameplay of Pac-Man 2 is laid out for you very early on in a pseudo-tutorial level. Pac-Man 2 is a hybrid of a point-and-click and a side-scroller. Since you have pretty limited pointer control using the D-pad, they decided to compromise and they made your cursor something a little more haphazard. A slingshot. Nope, no inventories or complicated item puzzles in this point-and-clicker. Oh no, here we are, an omnipresent overseer slinging rocks at Pac-Man's face. You've got three basic buttons. The B button is your primary button, and when you hold it down, it's the trigger to your slingshot. The A button is a secondary fire, and it slings the famous power pellets that turn Pac-Man into Super Pac-Man, and all of the ghosts turn blue so he can eat them. And finally, the C button acts as a buffer between you and Pac-Man, shouting at him directions to point his attention to. If you hold down the up button while pressing C, Pac-Man will look up. Hold it down, he'll look down. Left, he'll go left, and right, he'll go right. If you haven't already guessed, you're completely out of control of Pac-Man. Pac-Man is his own entity within the game and acts on his own accord, with you sort of just guiding him through the adventure like a fourth wall demigod. Thus, we get into one of the major highlights of the game. Pac-Man has different emotions and moods that affect how well he listens to you. It's not a direct tell Pac-Man to go somewhere and he goes there kind of game. Instead, you just sort of hope to God Pac-Man is in a decent enough mood to want to continue on. Sometimes he'll just get sad and he'll sulk around and will refuse to listen to anything you say. And sometimes he'll just be so pleased and full of himself, he'll figure, you're just an idiot with a slingshot. He's gonna do things his way. Fuck you. The bulk of the game is narrative-based, with Pac-Man following certain plot lines depending on the different tasks he's been given to complete in that particular level. In the first level, Pac-Man's baby is really hungry, so you gotta go get her some milk. Not, of course, from a store, mind you, but rather he's gonna go straight to the source and milk it himself. The introduction to the world really sets the stage for Pac-Man 2 as a really functioning, lived-in environment. You start to get a feel for the layout of the stage right away as you make the trek to the farm, and you get to see all the little crevices of the sleepy town that Pac-Man lives in. There's a suburban neighborhood with a dog and some people, a little downtown area complete with shops and an arcade, a hot dog vendor you can buy a hot dog from, assuming the alley cat doesn't steal it from you. There's a little park with a clock that plays a tune at noon, and the local farm complete with chickens and crows and a very pissed-off farmer. The level of interactivity with even just this small area is immense, as practically everything you shoot your slingshot at, Pac-Man can interact with or acknowledge. The best part is that each situation has a few ways it can go about happening for Pac-Man. If it ends in a negative outcome for you, Pac-Man will simply restart the level over from the last place he entered it from, letting you try the situation again. This is the face of a boy who's about to be mauled by a cat several times and he has no idea. The first area has a lot to do, and it's pretty straightforward in its execution. There are signs all over pointing you to your destination, but there's no specific path that must be followed or time limit to accomplish it in. An open-ended adventure where you can die several times until you get the timing down? Sounds like someone's getting ripped off by Dark Souls.